All right. Hello, everyone. Today we will be starting our first lesson of our first booklet, and this lesson is going to be on rounding. So for many people, this is going to be a nice review of last year, and if it is not, no big deal. We are going to talk about rounding from scratch, although it should not take us too long. Now, for today's lesson, I will be using 3 pages that you have in your binder. The first and most important page is going to be this lesson that you see on the screen. It is labeled Lesson 1 Rounding. After this page in your booklet, you should have a very similar page that says Lesson 1 Rounding Worksheet. We're going to talk about that a little bit today as well. And the third paper that I will be using today to help you out is actually in the back of your binder with your reference sheets. It looks like this, and it talks about the rules of rounding. Now, you do not need to take this sheet out of your binder, the rounding rules reference sheet. You're okay just to have this page up in your binder, the first lesson, and follow along with me. So let's get started. Now, when I give you a number that is perhaps a little bit more complicated than it needs to be, sometimes we round to make our life easier. For example, if I was to tell you that you had $134.92, it might just be easier if I round that and told you, well, we have about 100, we have about $135. Now, the good thing about rounding is that it makes our life easier. Instead of saying $134.92, I can just say $135. The downside about rounding is that it's not as exact. We're estimating. So if you need to be exact, you shouldn't be rounding, but that won't be a problem today. So the question is, how do we get from one number to the rounded version? That's what today is about. So let's use this example that I already have up on the screen. You do not need to write this down. I will tell you when you need to start copying. So $134.92. I might ask you to round to the nearest dollar. Now, when I tell you to round to the nearest dollar, the first thing that you need to think of is, when I'm talking about money, what are my dollars and what are my cents? So the dollars are all of your numbers before, to the left of the decimal. Your cents is everything to the right of the decimal. I've underlined that in red. So our cents are 92 and our dollars are 134. So if I ask you to round to the nearest dollar, the most important thing that you need to recognize is that we are rounding to the first number of your dollars. In this case, that's going to be the 4. So we are rounding this 4. So I'm just going to erase some of this to make our life easier. And I am going to underline the 4 to show that that is what we are rounding. Now, when you are rounding, you have 2 options. You can either round up or you can round down. Now, deciding whether we're rounding up or down, we actually need to use a number to help us that is not the 4. We are going to be looking at the number after the 4. So I'm drawing a little arrow from the 4 to show that we're using the 9 to help us. Now we say that if the number after the 4 is a 5, a 6, a 7, an 8, or a 9, then we're going to round up. If the number after the 4 was a 4, a 3, a 2, or a 1, then we would round down. Now, because this number is a 9, we're going to be rounding up. And what that means is that the 4 itself is going to go up to a 5. So this number is going to be 100. Let me pull up blue so we're consistent. This number is going to become 1, 3. The 4 turns into a 5 because we rounded it up. And then everything after our rounded number just becomes a 0. So this becomes $135, which we could write without the decimals and it would mean the same thing. That's up to you. Now, let's jump over to our lesson where you will start copying down some of these examples. Okay? So here's where you need to start filling in your note along with me. So, lesson 1 on rounding. Rounding is a way of simplifying numbers to make estimations and quick calculations happen more easily. We will be doing those calculations later in this unit. We can round to the nearest dollar, nickel, or cent. In order to complete rounding, we need to follow a couple of rules. So, our first number that we're rounding here is $167.34. And we're rounding this to the nearest dollar. So as I explained before, when you're rounding to the nearest dollar, you are looking at the first digit before the decimal. That's our 7. So find the place that you are rounding to is step 1. That's our 7. Step 2, look at the number after the place value you are rounding to. Well, the number after the 7 is a 3. The 3 is going to tell us how to round. So, using our cheat sheet, we know that, let me clean this up for you. Using our cheat sheet, we know that the number 3 is right over here, telling us to round down. So, since 3 is less than 5, that's what these symbols here mean, 3 is less than 5, that means that you round down. Now, the tricky part of this is that before, when we rounded up, our number increased. But when you round down, your number doesn't decrease. When you round down, the number that you are rounding stays the same. So in this case, our $167.34 would just change to 167. And then everything after that 7 would turn into a 0. Now, again, When writing the final answer, you can choose to take out those zeros. You can just write $167 like that, and it means the same thing. So remember, find the number you're rounding and use the number after to help you. If you round up, the number that you are rounding increases. If you round down, the number that you're rounding stays the same. Let's do another example, but start to pick up the pace a little bit. Now, there is one different part about this question. We're rounding $123.677, but we're not rounding to the nearest dollar. Here, we're rounding to the nearest cent. So make sure that you're reading your questions carefully. Now, usually when I write money, I do so using only two numbers after the decimal. For example, I might have $65.92. I don't usually write numbers after that too. It just doesn't really make sense. So when you think about rounding to the nearest cent, I want you to think about making money make sense. So we want to round the second decimal place because that's where we want to stop talking about the money. In other words, when I ask you to round to the nearest cent, just always pick the second number after the decimal place. That is going to be, in this case, the first 7. After that, the process stays the exact same. Let's follow these steps. Step 1, find the place value you're rounding to. Check, did that. Step 2, look at the number after the place value that you're rounding to. So we are looking after this 7, and conveniently, it's another 7. Now, 7 is greater than 5. So if you look at our cheat sheet, you'll see that because 7 is on this side of the diagram, we are going to be rounding up. Therefore, our 7, the first 7 that we're rounding, is going to go up to an 8, giving us 123.68, and then everything after that 8 is going to become a 0, which you can choose to include or choose not to include. So final answer, $123.68. So at this point, I recommend that you pause the video and try these next examples on your own, and then press play and make sure that your answers match mine, because these next couple examples I'm going to go through quickly, assuming that you've already tried them. Now, if you're still struggling with this, then just follow along with the video and hopefully it makes a little bit more sense. Example 1. Round $45.67 to the nearest dollar. We know that we're going to the nearest dollar. That means that we are rounding this 5, the first number before the decimal. Do I round the 5 up or do I round it down? In order to help me, I look at the number after the 5, which is a 6. Since 6 is larger than 5, we're going to be rounding up. So the 5 increases, turning into a 6, giving me $46 after we rounded. Question 2. Round $678 0.345 to the nearest cent. Well, nearest cent means that I'm picking the second number after the decimal. 4 is what we are rounding. I look at 5 to tell me how to round. 5 tells me to round up. As we can see in this diagram, 5 means that we round up. So that means that the 4 is going to increase to a 5, giving me rounded $678.35. Now I could write, whoops. Now I could write all right, that's not working, so we'll just talk about it. I could write a 0 after the 5, but I'm not going to do that. I'm going to choose to leave it out here. Next question, round $99.19 to the nearest dollar. Nearest dollar means that I am rounding this 9 that I've underlined, the first one before the decimal. I look at the number after to tell me how to round. That number is 1. 1 tells me to round down, or in other words, stay the same. So the number that I'm rounding, that 9 before the decimal, that's going to stay the same, giving me just $99. Question 4, round $12.452 to the nearest cent. Nearest cent means that I am rounding the second number after the decimal. I look to the 2 to help me decide if I'm rounding up or down. Since 2 is smaller than 5, I will be rounding down, which means I stay the same. The number I'm rounding, 5, stays as 5. So the rounded version would be $12.45. Good. So hopefully this lesson makes sense. If it does not, at this point, you might want to go back to parts of the video to help you with specific questions, or you might want to call upon your teacher to help you understand a little bit better. If you do understand this work, you should be moving to the next page in your booklet, which is this page over here called Lesson 1 Rounding Worksheet, and fill in these questions at your own pace. Okay, it's just the one page, question 1 and 2. Thank you.